Hello, and welcome to our podcast entitled Addressing the Significance for Value Chain Optimization. My name is Craig Resnick with the ARC Advisory Group, and with me today I have two special guests. Elias Panasuik, who is the Senior Global Program Director of EcoStruxure Power and Process for Schneider Electric, and Yong, Global Sales Lead of AVEVA Unified Operations Center. Welcome, Elias and Yong, today.
Thanks, Craig. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Craig.
Excellent. Great to have you. And you know, one of the things people might be wondering when they're talking about value chain optimization is, you know, really what is this going to pertain to? And certainly with both of your great backgrounds and in many of the solutions in which you get involved with, you both get involved a lot with operations centers. And then when I think of an operations center, I think of, you know, we think of it from the control side, where it may start off as a centralized control room, which might be used by most modern operations today to manage all control functions, you know, within a single operating site or plant. And you might see that on a single, you know, SCADA DCS network focused on OT data. But then as you begin to, you know, in the control realm, that may evolve its way to an integrated operations center, which is really used to combine multiple disparate control systems into an integrated functional management system for centralized command and control of the entire value chain if required. And that's really what we've been thinking in the past with control. But as we move into things like enterprise visualization, and we're moving over to, like, we may talk about things like center of excellence, and that are used to solve specific complex problems that can be applied across the business by consolidating experts, and could be things like asset performance management or ESG compliance, process optimization. And as that begins to evolve, that evolves into a unified operations center, which obviously Yong would be very familiar with since it's part of your title. And that really is where it's used as an enterprise level system, you know, that's converging IT, OT, and ET data, you know, across an entire business value chain, and aiding business decision support and dispatching operational commands. So, you know, as we're getting there and trying to evolve, and, you know, we look at value chain optimization, you know, not really as a destination, but as a journey, as people are evolving, say, from, you know, centralized control rooms to integrated operations center, or center of excellence to unified operations center. And, you know, but one of the things we're also noticing is that people migrating, say, from integrated operations centers, which sometimes we use the acronym IOC, and we see that moving over right from the control side to the enterprise side to these unified operations centers, which are UOCs. So, you know, one of the things I want to talk about is, do you guys have some examples of some customers that have really kind of helped, you know, made that migration from, say, the IOC to the UOC as part of their value chain optimization?
Sure thing, Craig. Maybe I'll cite one example of a customer that we recently were working with in the manufacturing space, but they also have some of their own supply when it comes to metals. And this was an organization that, you know, was struggling a little bit with balance of supply chain between their production facilities, where again they're mining raw materials, and their finishing facilities, where they're going through the manufacturing process. And the challenge was really meeting and having dynamic visibility of either disruptive events or opportunity events that would impact production schedule. So you had disparate groups of teams. Let's try that again. You had disparate groups of people really looking at these various systems, attempting to balance in real time, literally with phone calls and Teams messages. And lots of value leaks that happen throughout an organization. So, you know, one thing that we, as you mentioned, this is really more about a journey than a destination. But the baseline was really getting these systems in one consistent place, and then being able to look at both the production balance, but also the energy balance between these various sites. So this is a small example, but something obviously that's impactful in terms of how the organization is managing both their people and their process, and with room to grow into the future. They've already come up with a few additional use cases around things like asset performance management, and again, a dynamic asset visibility across this whole supply.
No, so that's certainly a very, very interesting case. I know, Yong, I think you also had a case that you wanted to discuss.
Well, actually, the question you asked was, I guess the maturity of companies that have actually gone beyond just control at a site level, potentially to even potentially all of process plant level, into what you call a value chain level, basically, essentially looking across the whole entire vertically integrated supply chain or demand chain, depending on the type of business. We see that in an example of a customer of ours, which is called ADNOC, which is short for Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, where what we see there is the true maturity of where, as you know, a lot of oil and gas companies have been doing and have been implementing integrated operation centers now for quite some time, so at least the last couple of decades. But the challenge we have is that, particularly for companies such as ADNOC, where they actually have interest across the entire value chain from the upstream, from production, all the way through to the supply to customers. And interestingly enough, they don't always manage the whole entire value chain in terms of all the businesses. In some cases, the businesses downstream or upstream could be separate entities altogether. Here you've got to actually optimize the whole entire value chain across multiple businesses. And in those cases, you cannot possibly control because you don't have the rights to control any of those operations, where there's a shift in terms of the optimization of the value chain into pure monitoring, where you can then dispatch or you can provide advice to the various parts of the value chain on how to optimize their plants, how to optimize their production to be able to get that whole lean manufacturing tech time concept, where you plan to optimize, minimize your inventories and optimize your production across the whole value chain. And this requires a high level of visibility across multiple businesses, across all of the flows between those businesses, and be able to plan that and optimize it. And in the case of ADNOC, they've been able to do that through this type of enterprise visualization, through visualizing the whole entire value chain, therefore shortening the time to plan significantly. And that's a huge savings there when you're talking about multiple businesses, Craig. And those savings are millions of dollars a month, that you can imagine.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty phenomenal as far as the savings. You know, one of the things we sometimes find with these major projects is the whole area of sometimes, you know, it's great to have the technology, but you really have to, the culture sometimes beats technology as far as whether these projects are going to be successful or not. And one of the things that in these cases is how are you able to see the cooperation that it takes to get all people to kind of share that common vision and the common goals and all be going in the same direction. And because for these things to work, like this to be this successful requires a great deal of collaboration. And so can you talk a little bit about that with your cases that you're describing?
Well, with respect to companies that are looking to literally integrate, or at least have a means of controlling better their entire value chain, like you said, it requires a high level of collaboration.
Yep.
And that collaborative platform has to be built in within the actual solution, because it requires an integration of business processes. And therefore, there's a lot of training, there's a lot of cultural shift, so to speak, to align all those various businesses. And that is why digital business process implementation is critical. So that, because people don't often remember when you have to do something that's unique that you haven't done for ever or in a long time, to be able to pick that up really quickly and smoothly. And so having that digital companion, so to speak, to kind of prompt you through the process is significant in terms of that cultural adoption, as well as the ability to incorporate things such as digital training capability, or what we call operator training type solutions, incorporated into the value chain optimization solution. So that certainly helps culture, but it certainly starts at the very top. At the very top, where the executives actually make the decision, because it really starts there for them to drive that cultural change and adoption of those technologies. I don't know if Elias is actually can comment on some of that itself, because it's a critical part for Schneider Electric, where they've got to bring in the control aspects, people that have been primarily concerned with control, and really getting them elevated to think about the entire value chain.
Yeah, those are great points, Yong. And just to grow a little bit on what you mentioned, the culture shift and the change management around this is substantial. And generally, when we've been working with clients that perhaps have tried to implement some similar systems or have not really been able to realize the return on investment, this is really often where it goes back to, is that you don't have a cultural alignment with change. And in an impactful change management process, that the way that you're asking people to work is different, but that it sticks. And those who are successful, as in the example that you gave, and the smaller example that I gave, those companies that are able to harness this, really comes down to that fact that you have a common vision. Again, we're talking about a common tool set, even though the data consumers and the application of that tool set can be different depending which part of the enterprise we're talking about. But you've got this sort of common view that continues to push against convention and against the way things were, right? Because we're talking about getting information out of those silos, getting the information and the people who need to make decisions as quickly as possible. And then, of course, keeping operations consistent, resilient, and safe. So making sure that the operator experience is augmented by all of this and not weighed down with unnecessary process. And again, when we think about the companies that are gone through these types of implementations, I'll draw back to what you said earlier, Craig, that it's not a destination. This is a continuing iterative process. If you think about the way that we as business owners use tools like Microsoft Office, for instance, we use those tools much differently than we did 5 and 10 years ago, and we will in 5 and 10 years. And this is no different in terms of a tool set that evolves with the changing needs of a business. And then, of course, you codify some of that knowledge, as Yong mentioned, around things like operator training, consistency in process, being able to have standardized audit trails, things like this, that you can then codify into your business and really work towards gaining efficiency, looking for outliers, and then gaining efficiency by working through that. But again, all of that needs consistency and I would say bravery on behalf of the people that are using this, that can become a professional, successful system.
Oh yeah, the bravery aspect is key, because many people tend to be risk adverse, and they tend to want to say, let's do things the way we've continued to do them, because I don't get rewarded for the great gains, but I will certainly be penalized if there's any issues, like, for example, unscheduled downtime, because we've tried something new and maybe it's not successful. So you think in terms of trying to convince the people that why it is worth it to take a risk, and show them the benefits of how it's going to not only certainly solidify their operations long term for the future, but it actually will provide them greater security if this works than if it doesn't work. Do you find that the overcoming those challenges, as far as trying to help to convince people to kind of be leaders and pioneers rather than be followers and be more reactive than, say, proactive?
Oh, sure, Craig. That's absolutely the case. I think that level of visualization, it's like the cat out of the bag. Once people have had the opportunity to see across the entire value chain, then they can start to see pretty obviously where are some of the kinks in that value chain, where are some of the inefficiencies across the value chain that really kind of stands out when you see that some parts of the link is potentially are weaker than the others. And it impacts the whole entire value chain. When people get that realization, they understand the need for them to cut across new boundaries, to understand the need for collaboration up and down the various parts of the value chain silos, what has been silos in the past, having to de-silo that in order to get those hidden benefits that they were not aware of prior to that. And this is really coming back again to having the executives have that view across the entire value chain so they can see the benefits and really impact those changes. Because once again, it really depends on the leaders of those businesses. But I think, Elias, would you agree that sometimes it's also the entire business landscape changes, mandating some of these requirements to start to change how and to pivot how they actually operate, particularly with the, they have to be brave, but also they have no choice when you take a look at some of the ESG initiatives that are coming out, that are basically being mandated by governments across the world. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you brought that up, Yong, because as we've been talking about promoting a culture of change, the buy-in from top leadership, being able to really link what's happening and at a boardroom level with the shop floor. A lot of that is coming from these new or renewed focus on KPIs like ESG. One thing that we've certainly seen much more of a call for from the context of an overall enterprise view is a simple KPI on paper is how much energy am I using per unit of production. So that could be a ton, that could be a truckload, that could be a barrel, whatever our customers are using for measurement. Again, that sounds simple, but there's a lot of complexity that goes into doing those equations properly, and then obviously equating that to how can we improve that, right? ESG isn't just about reports and about social governance, but also it's about efficiency. So again, we have data now in context, we're delivering it to the right people. And now again, those who are doing the analysis, who can make operational recommendations, have access to all that information in that same place, in that consistency that allows for, some of those other benefits around KPI management. And this also, we've talked a little bit about reducing silos. This is also about a common platform between teams. Again, I mentioned a little bit earlier that different users or different disciplines within an organization would use the tools a little bit differently, but the platform's the same. And so collaboration becomes much, much more straightforward than when you're in a, let's say, traditional OT IT architecture where we're simply passing data from one system to the next. But again, this is really about how do we view and manipulate that data, drive back down the right operational decisions, and then once again codify all that knowledge so that just becomes part of the overall process.
Yeah, where we see a lot of uptick with that and is really when we see applications that really leverage the digital thread. Because now you're able to tie things together, again, from the design and engineering, into the operations through maintenance. And now when all these tools are communicating with each other, you're able to kind of, when you talk about codify the benefits, that if now, for example, there's a different raw material that's procured, how does that affect, the design of the product? How does that affect the programming of the product, whether it be in a DCS or a PAC or a PLC? How does that affect the maintenance of the equipment that's now taken on the plant floor, for example, and all those assets? And by tying that all together, I think people begin to see the effects of how everything impacts the organization, and then the ways of being able to codify it, measure it, and really see how everything can truly benefit each other and how everything is truly, even these tools have to collaborate along with certainly the people. Are you finding that as you're kind of promoting technologies like digital thread and having these suites of software that really are truly integrated together, that they're able to get that kind of benefit from it?
Yeah, that's really the key, is that articulation of benefit, Craig, and again, how those tools are applied allows the benefit to be realized. And that's one thing why you haven't heard Yong and I talk about specific products or narrowed down
Right.
solutions in this space, because again, from one organization to another, even within the same industry, you have different business drivers. Again, you have different adoption curves and maturity curves, and different goals as an organization. I mentioned a little bit earlier, some of the challenges in the mining, minerals, and metal space. You can equate that in a lot of ways to other resource industries, where you have companies who are buying and selling product, not necessarily that they're producing. They have the ability to produce on their own. They have the ability to refine and change perhaps something they've bought into a different product. And all of that complexity leads to opportunity where our planners, our schedulers, our traders, our production people can collaborate and really drive the right decision making, or it can lead to challenges if those opportunities aren't realized quickly enough, as you said, a material change or a market disruption. If those opportunities aren't realized quickly enough, that all of a sudden starts costing millions of dollars in terms of lost opportunity cost or sunk production cost, where then you have finished materials that are sitting in a port that you don't have a buyer for. And so, some of those more esoteric examples, I guess, that I just gave in terms of the impact at an enterprise level really can't be understated. And again, that's about capturing opportunities, supporting the right decisions, and allowing folks to collaborate in such a way that those opportunities can be realized.
So that's a really good point, Elias, particularly in recent times. I mean, these are really strange times that we're living through, right? We've just been through a couple of years of the worst pandemic, and certainly in my lifetime, and all our lifetimes, actually, followed by a geopolitical disruption, particularly in Europe, and the supply chain bottlenecks that we're seeing now everywhere in every part of our lives. And those things were not issues that were anticipated just going back 3 years ago. And it takes more than 3 years for a lot of these businesses to be able to pivot in the past. And now these businesses have to be a lot more agile. That level of agility, when you're talking about risk, both of us, we're talking about risk. Risk is no longer just human safety is always will always remain a very important risk. But there's also risk in terms of just the ability to continue to operate, given the changes that all businesses around the world today are facing. If you're not able to pivot quick enough, then your competitors will eat your lunch. So, how do you value that level of risk mitigation? Like insurance. Isn't insurance just that? It goes beyond ROI, don't you think?
Oh, 100%. When we would doing project assessments with clients, in the past, it was all about efficiency and ROI, and you were making your investments really along as how can I have the most, productive plant possible, which is going to ensure that it's the most profitable, which is going to ensure its long-term, viability. Now that's really, now a factor, but now the companies that are going to survive long term have done the most to invest in their sustainability and their operational resilience, because you can have the most efficient production process possible, but if you can't get raw material, if you don't have a flexible supply chain, if you're not adaptive to be able to procure different raw materials from maybe different geographies and be able to reschedule your manufacturing on the fly, or be able to tie your manufacturing to various ports, for example, and be knowing that if this port is clogged up, now I need to find material that's going to go through a different port. Or if I don't have trucking to move my product or rail cars to move my product. So that all has to be integrated now into the process, because again, you could have the most efficient, you can make the greatest investments in the latest technology and automation, but if the supply chain and your logistics on also in real time, and if you can't be flexible based on that, also climate changes. We've had, we've certainly had recent examples of hurricanes and typhoons that have caused major supply chain disruptions. Of course, the geopolitical issues like you have certainly with Ukraine and Russia. But this is the thing now that's really front and center, is the companies that are going to be here long term are going to have the greatest sustainability and the greatest operational resilience. And those are the companies that you can't measure that always in an ROI calculation as you may have done in the past. It's really like the life insurance story, which is you have life insurance not because you expect to die, but it's more to make sure your family can get through things if God forbid you do. And I think this is really
a good example. Yes, absolutely. Life insurance, that's exactly right. In fact, sometimes you think about that having that level of visualization across your whole entire enterprise, so you could have that level of near real-time situational awareness of what's coming your way before it hits you. That is life insurance for companies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is that, when with weather forecasting, for example, now you're able to, sometimes you may have a week's notice between that. This is, this plant or this offshore platform is going to be impacted by a storm. Let's make the change. Let's do things in a predictive and prescriptive fashion now, and not wait till something happens and then we react to, how are we gonna get through it. And that really has to be completely integrated into the process. At the same time, where is my material coming from? Is my material coming from an area where there's potential supply chain disruption because of climate change? So this is all has to be completely part of the equation, and and this whole sustainability and operational resilience really has to become front and center. It's great to have it for companies to have it as published metrics on their website, to certainly from a public relations perspective, and certainly as something that's attractive to the investment community. But at the same time, it's really critical to their survival long term. So, are you seeing that some of your companies are really beginning to change and evolve where that's becoming more front and center when they're trying to do project justification?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the points that you made, Craig, around the supply chain side of this, right? And now I'll extrapolate that a little bit, not just from a raw materials perspective, but energy supply chain, water supply chain. It's been, I would say, a resounding call from the investment community, only amplified really through COVID, in terms of companies being able not only to justify their investment, how are they going to make sure that they maintain consistency of operations, react to some of these issues that we've already talked about through the long term, but then also if we're in an area where we know there's a lot of growth, right? If there's a greenfield project, likely there's more than one. So where is the energy going to come from in 5-10 years when an area is built up? If we have a facility that's highly dependent on usage of fresh water, how is that water going to be managed responsibly and consistently? So once again, there isn't a lack of a raw input to a process. These are, again, some of the fundamentals that I believe in my experience were taken for granted even as recently as a decade ago. That power will be there, water will be there. Let's focus on the actual operation. But again, now all of these other dynamics are coming to play, and the companies which are winning through this and able to secure those investments, able to move their projects forward, able to operate their existing facilities as efficiently as possible, are those that have view into that entire what we call wages supply chain. All of that plays a factor in this. But then also, as you mentioned, being able to have a simulation environment, a digital twin, all baked in to this type of an environment. And we can also do things like run what if scenarios. So, okay, we have a disruption in energy. What if? What does that look like? Do we need to do something in a fundamental design to provide backup power, to add a microgrid to a site, to be able to maybe shift production from one facility to another if there's an energy disruption? Again, you can't accurately model these things just with spreadsheets and whiteboards, right? You need, again, a knowledge base that's based on real-time operating data to be able to extract this kind of additional value out of it. Yong, I don't know if you've seen anything recently where we've been able to combine, kind of these dynamics of value chain optimization and simulation together, but certainly we've heard a new call from our Schneider customers.
Absolutely. The demand for that is definitely grown significantly. I mean, let's just take a couple of examples here. One of the things that we're seeing is that pivot into new energy sources, green energy, for example, like hydrogen, right? Or any of the renewables we're talking about. And a lot of these cases, they're not as, at least today, in today's level of maturity, you need to balance all of these energy sources because they don't come as reliably as fossil fuels. You can just burn coal whenever you want to, or burn diesel whenever you want to. But the sun doesn't always shine the same intensity all day long, for example, or the waves don't continue to pound at the same consistency, or the winds, for example. All of these have to be combined together with energy storage, and then in this case now with hydrogen is now coming up as a potential source of consistent fuel. But all of these require for you to be able to manage all of these different resources to optimize its capacity for your ever-growing needs. And you need to simulate that. You need to be able to have a view of how do I make sure my process will produce, my energy generation process will produce the amount of energy that I need, the quality that I needed for my processing plant. If you take a look at this whole energy transition, that is really adding a whole new dimension to businesses. You talk about metals and mining, Elias. If you take a look at the metals and mining, particularly the mining process, today a significant source of emissions comes from the actual haulage of material from the actual mine into the processing plants. Those diesel trucks are just huge consumers of energy and huge pollutants. And many mining companies today are looking to pivot into electrical vehicles. And then the question comes up about how do we power them? I mean, last I heard from one of my customers, again, to your question, Craig, is we've got a mining customer who's saying that it takes about two football fields worth of solar panels to be able to power a 300-ton truck up and down the slopes of a mine. If you think about that, some of these mines run 100 of these trucks. You're not going to have 200 football fields of solar energy, right? I mean, how are we going to manage this? This is now a problem that is being faced by many mining companies today. And so it requires having visibility across both your, at least today, during the point of energy transition, understanding where your energy sources are and how can you optimize that across the entire value chain, right? Not just the mining trucks itself, but the processing plant and then the logistics. This whole chain, it adds a level of complexity that unless you have, like you said, Greg, that digital thread, being able to understand from the point of design. So when you're looking at the problem, you're just not looking at it from just a pure operational view, but also from a design perspective, being able to simulate it, just like Elias said. All of these have to be at your fingertips for you to make the best decision, the most proactive decision, and the most profitable decision for your business.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then we also have to look at the other aspect where a lot of people have a lot of concern is the area of cybersecurity. We're noticing, when people are beginning to, say, migrate from these integrated operations centers, for example, IOCs, to the Unified Operations Centers, or the UOCs. Are you finding that, because when we have these, a lot of times that's when people are going through an IT, OT, ET convergence, so they're accelerating that process. Do you find many of your customers are kind of questioning as far as, do we have the right cybersecurity technologies, the right cybersecurity tools? Are we exposing ourselves by by putting all of this together? What are you hearing from some of your customers regarding cybersecurity?
Yeah, this is top of mind. Again, we've been talking about dynamic risk assessment, and when we think about unifying these systems together, to your point, Craig, there is a risk profile that comes along with that from a cybersecurity standpoint, and that's not to be understated in terms of, again, that organizational readiness, the maturity to be able to implement tools like this in a safe and consistent manner to make sure that it's hardened. One thing that we're finding at Schneider Electric, especially as we're delivering turnkey integrated power and process unified operations centers, is the need for cybersecure architecture right from the start. So again, right from the planning phase, that we make sure the right tools, people, and processes are in place. So it's not just about, again, one component or another, but a process around all of it, that it continues to stay updated, to manage that risk in as efficient as a way possible, give visibility into it. But again, being able to make sure that that doesn't hinder the user experience in terms of getting that data in time and supporting that kind of decision making. You know, as we're talking about the concepts around Unified Operations Center, we keep using C for center, but you know, quite often this is a platform that's cloud hosted by a customer, and people all over the world are accessing it, right? It's not necessarily everyone going to the same room to do that. So that also presents a different set of challenges in terms of how you manage that. But you know, one of the key pieces in all of this is, again, baking that cybersecure architecture in right from the start, making sure that the right, again, tools, people, and processes are in place. But also, if we're linking anything back down to an operational level, that you have the appropriate data federation policies in place to make sure that that information that's being pushed down, maybe it's an automatic work order that's been generated, or a call for a set point change for an operator, for example, that you've got the appropriate audit systems in place to make sure, again, that those packets of data are secure all the way down. It's certainly the tools, again, the technologies, all of this is available to make this work, but it can't be an afterthought, right? Very difficult to go in after the fact to do this without some sort of disruption.
I agree. In fact, you need to put some real significant forethought when you're looking to implement a solution like an IOC or UOC. You really need to understand what are your priorities for this particular solution that you're putting in place in terms of your visualization. Who are you really supporting? Who are the users? What are you really trying to achieve? For example, if a critical part of your focus is really to control, let's take a look at some of these again. Let's go back to metals and mining again, Elias, if you don't mind. We're seeing more and more autonomy being implemented within the mining industry, like autonomous haulage trucks and trains and so on, and drills as well. And with autonomy, what it does is it allows companies to be able to remotely operate their businesses, their mines, basically, that from thousands of miles away, from thousands of kilometers away, and having direct management of those equipment would require really communicating in that process control network that has to be firewalled and shielded away from things like the cloud for cybersecurity purposes, right? In those cases, then you need to understand that if you want to bring in the digital thread, Craig, as you mentioned, it comes in a different way, because you need to be calling on using things such as REST APIs for systems that actually reside in the IT network rather than the actual process control network, for example. You need to take that into account, because then the emphasis is more around control, safety of equipment, safety of process, safety of people. Whereas when you're talking about a control tower, when you're looking at a monitoring solution across your entire value chain, across potentially your shipping lines, your logistics, and so on, and you, like Elias said, then you need to think about how you manage those operations would be probably via messaging through to the control layer. And these, but then the emphasis is really about monitoring and making that high level decision, bringing in experts potentially from across the world through the internet, potentially. And so you need to shield your control systems away from the corporate network. And really, where do you implement these systems? That really makes a difference depending on what you are trying to do. So comes down again to knowing what you're looking for and what the solution has to do.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits, you know, when people with these unified operation centers, because they take advantage of IT/OT convergence, for example, and you're bringing in a lot of that cybersecurity expertise, say from the IT side. But by combining all that experience and knowledge from the OT side, they would know how to do that. They would recognize that you're not going to put your DCS, say, on the same network as your business systems.
Correct.
You know, and they recognize why that still needs to be separated. And obviously, there's cybersecurity risks obviously for anything that's connected. But this is a case where what could cause, disaster and danger, versus something that would be extremely inconvenient and cause a lot of issues, but not necessarily result in, catastrophe or a loss of life in some cases, as you could certainly have in a certainly a heavy process industry. So I think that's also really helps to kind of bring that level of expertise in. And the other thing it does is it also helps you to figure out where you can safely allow for remote monitoring, remote control. I mean, a lot of that was, we saw a lot of processes during the pandemic, 2.5 years ago, that people said, you will never be able to visualize this outside the control room, for example. And then when all of a sudden you couldn't get people into the plant, you recognize that you had to kind of make it some exceptions here to allow remote monitoring and sometimes remote control of certain processes, to be done off-site, or whether it be in people's homes or in knowledge centers of excellence, or maybe from different geographies that maybe weren't subject to a lockdown at that time. But the interesting part is nobody's going backwards.
No.
We haven't seen, even when most of the plants are reopened, and certainly we've still have seen some cases still in certain geographies of the world where there's still been some shutdowns. But at the same time, nobody's going backwards. So they recognize the benefit of having this ability to do remote monitoring, remote control when needed, taking it all advantage of all the potential cybersecurity. And believe me, if there's anything that's a journey, not a destination, it's cybersecurity, because you're always lucky to stay one step ahead. And that's certainly a continuous battle to maintain that level, certainly to provide that level of cybersecurity protection. So, I think that's something that has really benefited your customers and has really benefited the industry. So I'm glad you have some pretty good case examples of where you're seeing, some of this in fruition. But, as we begin to wrap up here, if you were to kind of each of you, if you would each say, okay, what are some of the key takeaways that you'd want people who've been listening to our podcast today to take back to their plants, and say, if there's some a couple of key points that you'd want them to know. We'll start with Elias, and we'll go to Yong.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Craig. I mean, really, again, as you think about the way you're doing your job today, your team, the people that you're accountable to, regardless of where you sit inside of an operation, you're always dependent on other teams' abilities to execute. That's true in whether we're in a process industry, in a knowledge-based industry, or others. And when we have the ability to collaborate in a way that we can support each other's decision making, we know that there's a platform that we can use to accommodate for that. And again, as time goes on, really be able to manage risk, not just within our own silos, but across an organization. That's how we win as companies. And, you mentioned the pandemic, Craig, and we talked a lot about some of the disruptions that have happened. The companies that have used this as an opportunity to take a pivot and really take advantage, not only of the technologies that are available, but the ability to change when there's already a disruption. Those are the ones we really see winning and being successful through this, and being able to bounce back and make decisions faster than their competitors, because a lot of that baseline knowledge is already there. And so then we can move quickly, can take advantage of opportunities, and of course do it in a very risk-aware way.
Thank you. This was great. Yong?
Yeah, look, I read an article not too long ago from McKinsey's, where it says that cross-functional operational transformations provide companies about 30 to 40% more benefit, or at least much higher levels of performance than the counterparts that still remain in silos. That's because of just their ability to gain value from data across the entire value chain. Having that access means it also incites better collaboration across the value chain instead of working in silos. What I would really encourage those who are listening to this podcast is to think about that. How much more value can you get if you had visibility and ability to collaborate across business silos that would otherwise curb your decision-making ability? that is probably the thing that you want to think about the most, because that's where you will understand where the value exists in something like value chain optimization.
Right, because there really is no, if you can't make decisions if you don't have complete transparency of data and information, which requires the visualization. And that, yep, yeah, exactly. And you have to have that, and it has to be trusted. It has to be what we always like to call the single version of the truth.
Yep.
And I think that's really the difference between the companies long term that are going to not only be sustainable, but the companies that are really going to thrive long term is full data and information transparency, broken down silos, firewalls that have come, not cybersecurity firewalls that have come down, but organizational firewalls that have come down, and a true collaboration where again where people look at things and employees are embraced in the respect, and because they develop a sense of ownership for these projects. The vision has to come from the top down, but the people at all levels have to see how this is going to benefit them, their job, their company, their overall job security, and how that let them feel empowered and embrace the technologies. And so if you're going to have any hope of certainly this cross-value, cross-functional value chain, this is really what's going to help to accelerate this. And
exactly.
That's what we're the most excited about, certainly at ARC.
Precisely.
Well, Elias and Yong, I want to thank you so much for your participation. Great commentary from both of you, and look forward to doing this all in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Craig. Thanks, Yong.
Yep,
Appreciate
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And again, this is Craig Resnick coming to you from the ARC Advisory Group, wishing everybody a great day. Thank you so much.